The Sad Story of Henry, and Edward Gordon and Henry, is effectively the first two-parter in the Thomas and Friends series. The story behind this is interesting because the Reverend intended to leave Henry in the tunnel. More on that later though. Timestamps on screen. Starting with the play-by-play, The Sad Story of Henry opens with a wonderful rainy weather shot of Henry running hard with a passenger train and looking very unhappy. This is the first time we hear Henry's theme as well. I thought it was quite good. The first words in the episode are a nursery rhyme telling of an engine afraid of the rain who ran into a tunnel and wouldn't come out. 17 seconds into the episode and I've already got to stop to praise and complain about this episode. These sets are very small, due to the limitations of the studio where they recorded the episodes. Or at least for the first few seasons. In the original cut, they did some movie magic to block out really bad errors in shots. As I'm reviewing this, I watched the remasters, and that's likely the footage you're seeing on screen. In the remaster, you can see the edge of the tunnel set. It's bad. I remember a comment on my first video on this channel stating that the remasters use different shots or wider shots, showing off more flaws. So I went back and checked the same scene in the original cut, and just look at how much better that is. Also, ponds! My praise is the ponds. They look really nice. Back to the story. The engine's name is Henry, and his crew argued with him, but he wouldn't move. The guard, the passengers, his crew all tried, but he just wouldn't budge. He didn't want to ruin his paint for them. After a while, Sir Topham Hatt comes along and coordinates everyone to pull Henry out, but didn't help himself. And he says, "My doctor has forbidden me to pull." After that, he coordinates them all to push, and he uses the same excuse. A cute bit of comedy so early in the show. Who would have guessed the guy in a suit didn't want to get his hands dirty? When that doesn't work, he calls Thomas to come push Henry out. They try once again to reason with him, pointing out that it stopped raining, and he shoots back with, "Yes, but it'll begin again soon. What'll become of my green paint with red stripes then?" Since that hasn't worked, they have Thomas try to push him out, and it's just no use. His best efforts aren't enough to move Henry. Eventually, even Sir Topham Hatt gives up. Reasoning and brute force didn't work. Now it's time for punishment. He tells Henry that they'll be taking his rails away and leaving him in the tunnel for always and always and always. In this shot, Henry doesn't seem all that worried about it, but in the next one he seems to understand his situation. The scene has Sir Topham Hatt overseeing some workmen as they pull up the rails and build a wall blocking Henry in. The narrator doesn't say it here, but I can only imagine that with every new addition to the wall, Sir Topham is just yelling at Henry, furious at the time and money he's cost him, making him feel his actions deeply. All he could do now is watch trains as they run into the other tunnel, and think on his mistakes. He's very sad, and he thinks no one will ever see his lovely green paint with red stripes again. Edward says hi when he passes, and as you'd expect from Gordon, he uses it as a chance to taunt Henry. Soot from the tunnel has ruined his paintwork anyway, and he wondered if he'd ever be let out. The episode ends with Ringo Starr saying that yeah, he thinks Henry got what he deserved. On its own, there isn't all that much to this episode's story, but I gotta give it big props for remaining interesting while taking place almost entirely on one set. Simple story with an ambiguous ending. If you stop watching the show here, you can join those people who think Henry dies in there. I'm really impressed with the single set keeping my attention for so long. Henry being stubborn seems almost realistic as well. Some people commit to believing something even if they know it isn't true, just so they don't have to admit to being wrong. That's Henry right here. Cute, simple, slightly ominous story with an ending like that. Don't worry, it's not over yet. Time for the play-by-play part 2. This episode opens with a shot of James coming into Knapford Station from the front end pulling a goods train, facing away from the camera. We see Edward and Gordon waiting to head out with their own trains. Gordon is wearing a remarkably neutral expression as he pulls away. Not smug, not bored, not happy, not anything, just neutral. I don't think we see this face hardly ever, which is probably why it stood out to me so much. The narrator reminds us how proud Gordon is to be the only engine that can pull the express, and says it's full of important people like Sir Topham Hatt. Today, Gordon is pushing himself just to see how fast he could go. In a minute, he'd pass Henry in the tunnel. Meanwhile, Henry continues to sit there feeling miserable and wondering if he'll ever be let out. Back to Gordon, he's planning to whistle at Henry, and he was almost there when a jet of steam erupted into his cab. He lost power quickly, and his driver brought him to a stop just outside of the tunnel. He had burst his safety valve. There was no way he could move this train. Henry laughs at Gordon from behind the little wall while Gordon mourns the loss of a good run. They use a little sound here in place of actually having Henry laugh. It's a cute little noise. Not too hard in the ears, gets the message across, does sound like a laugh. Sir Topham Hatt finds something to stand on and does so in front of Gordon while his crew looks him over. I've never liked these big engines always going wrong. Send for another engine at once. Gordon crawls out of the way with what little steam he has left, coming to a stop on a siding near the tunnel. Side note, Gordon's trailing wheels freeze up here while he's pulling away. With Edward being the only engine left, they ask him. "I'll come and try," he says. Gordon says it'll be no use, and Edward tries to get the train into motion. This time, however, Gordon was right. Then he suggests having Henry try. Sir Topham takes this advice. Henry jumps on the chance to pull a train again, and his crew bring him up to steam. By the time he's moving, the wall is already being torn down. Henry heads back out of the tunnel and looks for a place to turn around. After that time in a tunnel, his joints are all stiff and he's covered in soot. By the time Henry's back, he's feeling much better, and he's ready to take his train. We get a very short shot of a very dirty Henry next to Gordon as he backs down. Edward and Henry start off saying, "Pull hard, we'll do it. Pull hard, we'll do it." And they did. The coaches were excited, the passengers were relieved, and Sir Topham Hatt was excited enough that he leaned out of a window to wave at the engines. But they were going so fast his hat blew off, and right into a field where a goat ate it. They ran hard until they made it to the end of the line. Of course, it shows us Wellsworth as the end of the line here, but we know that's not the case. The passengers thank the engines as they depart, and Sir Topham Hatt promises Henry a new coat of paint. On the way home, Henry and Edward collect Gordon and help him back to the sheds. They're all good friends now. Henry doesn't mind the rain now because he knows the best way to stay clean is to have his driver wipe him down at the end of the day. So, when Wilbert Awdry wrote The Three Railway Engines, it was originally composed of 3 stories ending in the sad story of Henry. For the books to be published, however, Wilbert had to write another story where Henry gets let out. That's where this 2-parter originates from. It allowed the story to go from a few loosely connected stories to being tied together into something that can be built off of, and here we are. Without adding this 4th story, the show I'm reviewing here would never have existed. The story itself, though, I have some things to say. This 2-parter introduces Henry and Sir Topham Hatt. Henry is a stubborn engine, but not necessarily lazy. He's cynical, worried about his image. So worried, in fact, that he'll ruin it himself. Accidentally, of course, but the point is he made a fool of himself, and then was determined to prove his worth when the opportunity came to him. He's made a 3D character in 2 short episodes. Sir Topham Hatt, or the Fat Controller, the man in charge of the whole railway. He's both clearly an authority character and a comedic relief at this episode. In the sad story of Henry, he proves to be lazy at best when he has all of his passengers push and pull, but doesn't join them. Later, a goat eats his hat. However, he does block Henry in the tunnel, and may well have left him there forever. He outright says that he doesn't like big engines, and he views them as unreliable. He's in charge, potentially unreasonable, and very clear with his thoughts on things. He doesn't appear in stories until this point, and it almost doesn't make sense that he didn't. Surely, he would have had a lot to say about the station pilot being taken halfway across the island. When Henry proves his worth, Sir Topham Hatt promises him a new coat of paint for his efforts. We both see his anger and see his kindness here. We know he isn't just an angry authority figure. He's also ready and willing to reward hard work and good behavior. He does have a railway to run after all. On that note, the punishment of Henry feels a bit absurd. He blocked off a whole tunnel, an extra line that can be used. That must not be much of a big deal though, because we're meant to believe that there's only 3 mainline engines at this point, and with Henry blocked up, there's only 2. On the other hand, Henry is a machine, and when he isn't working, he isn't living up to his potential and purpose. He is actively wasting money by doing nothing. It's no wonder in this case he had to be punished. Nobody but him could give out this punishment, of course. For this railway to work like the business it is, Sir Topham Hatt has to seem like the bad guy sometimes. It just needs to be severe and painfully clear to Henry how he messed up so that he'd never do this again. Again, 2 episodes made him a multidimensional character. His reasoning is simple and understandable for a child audience. Well, there's a little chuckle in there for those familiar with lazy bosses. Edward has a simple purpose in this story. All they needed was to show him trying, and they did just that. He had no hope of actually doing this job. The Express is far too heavy for him at this point. But the determination he showed in the last episode had to show up for him to be part of this story. Another step was needed between Henry and Gordon, and Edward had a story that needed to be tied up. Win-win. Gordon has a big shift of character here. He's entirely disabled here, and in this case, it lightens his ego. When Edward fails, it's Gordon that suggests having Henry try, because despite his pride, he does want the train to go on, with or without him. On the hill, he could pretend it didn't happen and go ahead. Here, he has no option but to ask for help. We finally have more to his character than the cruelty he shows in the last 2 episodes. We aren't quite there yet, but his character is being fleshed out now. With Edward's place on the railway having been established, Henry redeemed, and Gordon humbled, this book can end with a satisfying conclusion. As for the series, well, we've got just a little further to go yet. After all, the title character needs more attention. Really though, these first few episodes have been the purest form of the series. Simple storybook tales. We have a redemption story, an underdog story, and a few greatly humbling experiences in just the first 4 episodes. Only 580 to go! This 2-parter has earned a 9 out of 10. This is very good. Excellent, simple storytelling, but you just know that the series has more to give. Grander sets, more heartfelt stories, and of course, better music. Perhaps as I get further, I'll have to rethink my ranking system. The Grainpuff 2-parter makes nearly everything seem dull in comparison. We're still at the start of the series, of course, and they have 40 years to get better. Thinking on it now, yeah, a rework is in order. It's pretty unfair to lump it all together when the eras are so totally different. I did consider giving this a 10, but when I balance it against the best of the later seasons, it just seems unreasonable. When I've figured it out, I'll let you know. Hope to see you down in the comments of this one or the next one. Later.